Welcome back to Creator Commons, where we talk to creative people about their processes and creativity. I'm your host, Andrew Mack, and today I'm here with Oliver
Oliver
Harbor.
Harbor.
Yes. So, can you just tell us a little bit about what kind of work you do, who you are?
So I'm Oliver. I'm a graphic designer from New York. I'm a big car person. That's kind of always been my passion. And yeah, I pretty much do every sort of artistic like medium there is and very interested in pretty much everything.
Yeah. Is there any ones that you particularly specialize in? I know you mentioned graphic design.
Pretty much like Illustrator work,
Okay.
designs like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just jump right into questions. So, where do you even start this process of looking for art? Like, where do you find your inspiration?
Pretty much just people that have done the same thing that
Mhm.
I'm trying to do, and then not mimicking them, but kind of looking at all of their works and then trying to mimic each one like in a certain way in the one work that I'm doing.
Mhm.
So kind of like a hodgepodge of different artists.
Yeah, I think that's the really interesting thing about art is we all claim to be original, but we never are.
Yeah. I mean, you got to know where to start somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, and like there's a reason that we've set like standards for art. I know I'm speaking from the film industry perspective. We have certain standards that we use in order to make sure that we're teaching people the right language, that they understand what we're saying correctly without having to just put everything on the page.
Yeah.
Is there stuff like that in Illustrator or graphic design work?
I mean, I would say it's not more so like the product, but it's more so like what goes into making the
Mhm.
product and the steps it takes to get there. Like there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And it'll like, that's really what makes it look the way it does.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Can you give us an example of one of those?
Just like making shapes and like choosing where to put shadows and,
Mhm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many things to think about.
Yeah, of course. That's another really interesting thing about art is that, and I've talked about this before, is there's this idea of the skill gap, like where we are as artists now, as opposed to where the masters are,
Yeah.
and that like we're really good at, we might be really good at what we do, but by the time we reach the level of the masters, we're gonna have our own way of doing things and our own creativity,
Yeah.
so that nobody can really ever replicate what somebody else is doing.
Yeah.
Like realistically, if you're creating arts with integrity, because there's forgers out there,
Yeah.
you know, you'll never get to a
Yeah.
point where you're just straight up copying somebody's work.
No. And I mean, you don't want to because it's just, and it's not showing your own mind. And I mean, I said like trying to mimic parts of like what other artists do, but
Mhm.
it's more so just figuring out what you like about what these artists do
Yeah.
and then making your own style in general just
Mhm.
off that.
Yeah. So let's jump to the next question that I have for you that kind of relates to this. What are your signs that an artist is either really good or that inspiration that you're getting from them is, top notch and you really want to take it and run with it?
I mean, personally, I've liked some pretty obscure art. I've also like not liked some really popular art. So it's like I don't know. I some art I may like for some reasons that someone else might not like the art. So I don't know. Personally, I think art is really just up to the person. And if, you know, if someone doesn't like a piece, then so be it. But I mean, I'm sure the artist had a reason to make what they made
Mhm.
for themselves. If that didn't compute, then yeah, that's, I
Maybe you
think,
weren't the audience for
yeah,
it then. I
I
mean,
don't know.
and we've seen it's really interesting. You'll see like online people complaining about like films and that kind of stuff
Yeah.
that weren't made for them.
Yeah.
Like you'll see people complaining about like adults complaining about the simplicity of a children's film. And I'm like, but that wasn't designed
Yeah.
for you. That was designed for them.
Yeah.
Because you don't enjoy or relate to something doesn't mean it's inherently bad. It just means that it's not meant for your eyes.
Yeah.
And I, I mean, on that point, kind of what in your life do you pull that, like where do you relate to a lot of these artists, or do you find like a key element that you connect with people on?
With art, I mean, I feel like I'm able to connect with previous artists through the message in their works sometimes.
Mhm.
Sometimes I don't. But when I do, I usually find it's through like the messages in their art or like the meaning behind it, over the whole thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's less of a stylistic
Yeah.
relation and more of a deeper understanding of who the artist is as a person.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because our school has some artists who will come through, notably some photographers. There was one who did an episode or did some works that came out of I want to say Kenya or Sudan. That was like the Tears of Wangola exhibit. Did you go and see that?
I think I did. I
Yeah.
stopped in, I believe, earlier this semester. Yeah.
Yeah, it was it was a really interesting piece because at first I didn't understand it. But when I got to know the artist, I sat down with him, I was able to talk to him. It changed my entire perspective on the art. It made it so much more meaningful. It made it so much more powerful and how it stood out. The idea of religious persecution that you don't necessarily understand unless you're familiar with the subject matter around it.
Yeah.
So, kind of branching off of what we're talking about, like what kind of car things should people be looking at in order to move in that direction if they want to be a professional in that industry? If they want to be specifically doing graphic design for cars, what are they looking at and what are you looking at?
I mean, well, so in the automotive industry, really with any industry that's like design oriented, and it's also, let me rephrase. It's a business, which is different than if you're making art for yourself or design for yourself. I feel like it's a little different because it's money driven and it's driven by the consumer. So you're kind of more forced to work a specific way rather than like a freelance artist.
Yeah,
But
for sure. But
it's a little, I don't know, it's a little complicated because I feel like it really depends on the car too,
Mhm.
or which company it is, because they all have such different design languages and
yeah.
theories like
Mhm.
of how they do stuff.
Yeah. Can you kind of give us an example for, let's take a fun one, BMW. Like what if you were looking at their work, or have you looked at their work?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I assumed. But looking at their work, how would you break down what their design language is so a graphic designer like you could do it for a different car brand?
I mean, when it like, as far as their advertising or their like just cars themselves.
Let's do the advertising since that's more the graphic
Yeah,
design side
yeah,
that you're
yeah.
working in.
Yeah. I mean, I would say with BMW, it's a performance brand, so that usually their ads have some sort of like racetrack involved or like alpine mountains and stuff, or they have the car sliding around a like backstreet corner. I don't know, but I feel like it's different from Mercedes, which is like some old dude in Florida in their commercial and just driving around and cruising. But I don't know. I feel like it depends on the company. Like,
I get what you mean. I think that it's really interesting because BMW and Mercedes are oftentimes compared when
yeah,
their advertising would give you no reason
Yeah.
to compare them.
they're very different.
They're very, very different. And I feel like it's a mistake a lot of people end up making.
Yeah.
Is thinking that, oh, they're the same.
Yeah.
And I'm currently in a marketing class right now, and we're talking about like points of difference in your branding and all that kind of stuff. And I find it really, really interesting to think that they have sat in a room, had the same conversation that
Yeah.
we would have starting up a brand, and the same things that I learned in a marketing class, they're still doing today. And it's fundamentally, it's all basics, and then it's design on top of that.
Yeah.
So moving into our final question, what is kind of your process when you are found the idea you want to work with? It's probably like a bigger piece because small pieces, I mean, we just kind of rip those out and
Yeah.
go for it. What would you say your process is to kind of get started? And
Like for a bigger, like a book or something like that.
something like that.
I would say it just starts with the layout and kind of starting like generally, but if I have it written out already, I'll read the book first and
Mhm.
just kind of figure out how I can work in maybe imagery that has to do with the book, or figure out a font that kind of is a like has a more pleasing appearance in like a comforting way or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind of just trying to tailor the layout to the story
Yeah.
is kind of important, and I
Mhm.
feel like sometimes it's not like done, but
Yeah. I don't know. I saw something the other day about children's stories
yeah,
and like how demanding it really is to make a children's
yeah,
book.
it's
Like
crazy.
parents pick these up and they're like $10, $15 hardback books with like 20 pages in them,
Yeah,
but they could take 6 months to a year to develop that properly.
yeah,
You have to not only write the story, but you have to attach certain imagery. You have to make sure it's child friendly. Then there's that. Then there's the part about testing it to see if it even works
yeah,
for your audience.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a
It's
long
a
haul
lot of work,
process. Yeah.
and especially like then you have to go through publishing the book, which is a whole other stuff.
Oh yeah,
But
for sure. Yeah. But once you've kind of gotten the layout, you've
yeah,
gotten the fonts that you're going to use. How do you make that imagery? Like, if you're going with a book, like, depending on the book, you want to make it obvious, but not too obvious because then
yeah,
it's like speaking down to the reader.
yeah,
How do you manage like that fine line of making sure that you have a something that's going to contribute to the book and is telling the
yeah,
same story, but is also not talking down to your reader?
yeah. Or like taking away from the book too.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to like clutter the reading space
Yeah.
and distract people. But um, I would just say it really like depends on the book, and it depends like if it's a children's book, you kind of do want to dumb it down. But if it's like a car magazine, or like just a eating magazine, like healthier ways to eat, or like just an article like whatever, um I don't know, I would kind of just make it more bold, like pop out, like if it's going to be sold in a supermarket, should probably have it stand out from everything else.
Yeah.
But
So it comes down to knowing the audience.
yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, I think that applies across most art forms, honestly.
yeah,
If you're doing stuff for hire, you really have to know who you're speaking to,
yeah,
because if you don't, you are going to miss what they find important. You're going to either dumb it down too much or go over their heads. I mean, I heard someone say write everything at a maximum of an eighth grade level,
yeah,
because if you write past that, the general consumer
yeah,
doesn't want to pick that up.
yeah,
So, I mean, unless you're talking like college professors,
yeah,
which is rarely a market for me, but
yeah.
that's just me. But let's wrap things up. Um, where can they find you, Oliver?
I am on Instagram at oharbor, OHARBER.
Awesome. You can find me at amacphoto92 on Instagram. And next time we will have my good friend Henry on the podcast to talk about cinematography. Thank you all for listening, and go in peace.